Lucas Reed did not believe in second chances. Not in business, not in life, and definitely not in love. The sleek black town car pulled up to the private terminal at San Francisco International Airport just as the sky began to dim. A winter storm was forecasted on the East Coast, but that didn't matter. Lucas was flying ahead of it, ahead of everything. His assistant had offered a private jet, but Lucas refused. He preferred commercial flights for one simple reason: anonymity. No investors to entertain, no fake smiles, no small talk, just quiet efficiency and the illusion that he could disappear into a crowd, even for a few hours. United Airlines Flight 799 was boarding when he arrived. He gave the gate agent a silent nod, flashed his platinum frequent flyer card, and took his seat in 1A without a word. The other first-class passengers barely glanced his way, which was just how he liked it. He loosened his tie, pulled out his tablet, and began flipping through the merger documents his legal team had sent overnight. The numbers were solid. The acquisition would go through next week. Another victory. Another line in his growing empire. And yet, beneath the clean rows of profit projections and brand valuations, Lucas felt nothing. Just the same emptiness that had followed him since the day he walked away from something far more personal than any company. The boarding announcements continued, but he barely noticed. His mind wandered back to a hotel lobby in Rome 6 years ago where a woman in a red dress had asked him one last time to choose her over a deal. And he hadn't. He blinked the memory away. That was the past, dead and buried. He focused on the present. The plane rolled away from the gate, right on schedule. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker, cheerful and professional. A smooth flight ahead, he promised. Estimated time to New York, 4 hours and 12 minutes. Lucas leaned back as the engines roared and the aircraft lifted into the dusk sky. He glanced briefly out the window. Clouds swallowed the sunlight, and soon the plane leveled out above the world. He tapped the call button, ordered a whiskey neat, and returned to his screen. The documents were clean, organized, efficient, everything a life built on control and precision should be. Still, as the flight attendant handed him his drink, his fingers brushed hers, and something in him tensed. He nodded his thanks but didn't meet her eyes. People made things messy. He had learned that the hard way. The cabin lights dimmed as dinner service began. Lucas wasn't hungry. He removed his cufflinks, loosened another button, and stared at the back of the seat in front of him. He hadn't planned to think of Elena today, or this week, or ever again, really. But maybe that was the lie he told himself. Because no matter how many years passed, he still saw her sometimes in music he didn't mean to hear, in the way a stranger tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in silence. Elena Carter had been the one woman who saw past the title and the money. She had met him before the IPO, before the Forbes cover, before the glass towers and the high-stakes boardrooms. She had seen the boy who stayed up until 3 a.m., building code and burning through cheap coffee. She believed in him when even he didn't, and he had left her anyway. Because success, he told himself, couldn't be built on sentiment. The flight was smooth. No turbulence. No distractions. But somewhere over Kansas, a faint metallic pop echoed through the fuselage. Lucas looked up. Most passengers didn't notice. A few blinked and returned to their movies. But something about the sound tugged at his instincts. Then came the vibration, soft, at first almost imagined, then sharper. A low rumble passed through the cabin floor. Lucas sat straighter. He heard a flight attendant whisper something into a phone. Then the captain's voice returned, but this time it was different. Slower, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical issue with one of our engines. Please remain calm and seated with your seatbelts fastened while we assess the situation." Lucas's heart didn't pound. Not yet. But he closed his tablet, gripped the armrest, and stared straight ahead. The lights flickered. Then the plane dipped. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for silence to spread like smoke. In that suspended moment, with 1,000 feet dropping beneath him, Lucas Reed, the man who never panicked, felt something unfamiliar climb into his throat. He didn't know yet that someone from his past was about to walk back into his life. He didn't know her uniform would be the last thing he expected, and he definitely didn't know that this flight would change everything. The hum of the engines had become background noise, a steady rhythm beneath the quiet cabin. Until it wasn't. Lucas felt the shift before he heard the sound. It was subtle at first, a faint drop in pressure, a tremor in the floor that rattled the glass on his tray. Then came the lurch. A sharp downward jolt that sent a gasp rippling through the passengers. Drinks spilled. A tray clattered to the floor. Somewhere in economy, a child screamed. The captain's voice returned, now urgent, clipped. "We've lost one engine. Flight attendants, take your seats. Everyone fasten your belts immediately." Lucas didn't move. His hands were tight on the armrests. His eyes scanned the cabin. Flight attendants moved quickly, strapping in with forced calm, but their expressions betrayed tension. Then another sound. A sputter. A groan from deep beneath the aircraft. The second engine choked once, twice, then died. The lights flickered and went out completely. The cabin dropped into a dim, eerie red glow. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling like lifeless vines. People screamed now, no longer confusion, but real, primal fear. Lucas's breath came shallow. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a routine failure. This was gravity, raw and fast. He fumbled for his mask but hesitated. He had always believed he could control anything. Market crashes, legal crises, even heartbreak. But not this. He turned to the window. Black sky. No city lights below, no points of reference, just falling. A flight attendant shouted from the front, her voice cutting through the chaos. Row 17, row 17. Now Lucas blinked. What? A woman stood slowly, calmly. Row 17 was mid-cabin where business class met economy. All eyes turned to her, a slim figure in a dark gray hoodie, hair pulled back in a tight knot. She removed her headphones with a deliberate motion, handed her bag to the stunned man beside her, and stepped into the aisle. Someone muttered, "Who is that?" Another passenger scoffed. She probably thinks the cockpit's a TikTok studio. But Lucas was still staring. Something in the way she moved, measured, precise, unfazed, made him pause. She wasn't guessing her way forward. She knew where she was going. She passed his row. He caught only her profile, sharply familiar, the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the emergency lights above with quiet calculation. No, it couldn't be. Elena. His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. She didn't stop, didn't even turn. Lucas unbuckled his belt and stood ignoring the protests of the flight attendant rushing toward him. "Elena," he called again. This time she paused just outside the cockpit door. Slowly she turned. Her face was calm, her voice even. "You should sit down, Lucas." His heart slammed against his ribs. The chaos around him blurred. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke with chilling clarity. "Taking control of the aircraft." The cockpit door opened. A uniformed crew member waved her in relief, evident in his expression. Lucas stood frozen as the door shut behind her. Everything around him was still moving, panicked passengers, crew shouting instructions. But he was somewhere else. Somewhere 6 years ago, where Elena Carter had sat at a piano in his penthouse playing softly, while he took a call he shouldn't have. He had chosen business over her over and over, until she walked away. He had assumed she'd go back to music, that she'd find a quiet life somewhere far from his world. He had never imagined she would walk into a cockpit mid-flight and speak with the voice of someone trained to save lives. The aircraft jolted again. A voice came through the intercom. "This is Elena Carter. I am assuming co-pilot responsibilities due to incapacitation of the first officer. Please remain calm. I am executing emergency procedures. Do not remove your oxygen masks. Do not stand. Lucas's knees buckled, and he dropped back into his seat. The same woman who had once asked him to leave everything behind and start over was now the only reason this plane hadn't become a tomb. He looked around. The passengers were silent now, their fear morphing into something else, hope, maybe. He stared at the cockpit door, his mind racing. She hadn't even looked surprised to see him. But he had never been more shaken. The woman he left behind hadn't just survived. She had transformed. And now at 30,000 feet, Lucas Reed was no longer the one in control. The cockpit door remained closed, a sealed world beyond Lucas's reach. From his seat in first class, he stared forward, as if willing it to open again, as if the woman who had just walked through it might reappear and offer an explanation for the impossible. Elena Carter. The name echoed in his chest, louder than the silence that had filled their years apart. 6 years ago, she had stood in front of him barefoot on the cold marble floor of his apartment, holding a ring box in one hand and a one-way plane ticket to Prague in the other. Her eyes were red, her voice cracking as she said, "Lucas, I'm not asking you to stop building empires. I'm asking you to make room for me in the life you're building." He had looked at her and said nothing. He had simply turned away to take a call about a last-minute merger deal that would double the value of his company. By the time he turned back, she was gone. He never chased her. And now here she was. No longer the woman who played Rachmaninoff at midnight in his penthouse, who wrote him handwritten notes on napkins, who once cried at a dog food commercial. This Elena wore a regulation headset, stood in a flight deck during a full-blown systems failure, and had not so much as flinched at seeing him. Lucas pressed his fingers to his temples. Around him, passengers whispered, prayed, clutched one another. The chaos had quieted into tension now, controlled fear. He leaned toward the aisle and flagged down a flight attendant, the same one who had shouted for row 17. "Who is she?" he asked. His voice was low, urgent. "The woman who went into the cockpit." The attendant hesitated. "She's a certified emergency co-pilot. Former Navy Reserve, I think. She's trained for situations like this." Lucas stared. "Elena Carter." The woman blinked, surprised. "You know her?" He didn't answer. But he knew. Not the military version. Not the pilot. Not the uniform. He knew the woman who once picked wildflowers on their hikes and kept a journal full of sketches and aviation quotes, even though she never told him why. He had always assumed the quotes were symbolic. Metaphors for freedom. Escape. He hadn't realized they were literal. A tremor passed through the plane. The lights still flickered between emergency red and dim white. The intercom crackled again. "Elena here. We are experiencing dual engine failure with partial electrical systems. I am in communication with ground control and executing dead stick procedures. Repeat, we are gliding without power. We are seeking an emergency landing path. Remain seated." The silence that followed was absolute. Dead stick landing. Even Lucas, with his limited knowledge of aviation, understood the term. No thrust, no engine, only gravity and airspeed. She was flying a 150,000-pound metal bird like a glider. He closed his eyes. The woman he had underestimated, who he once believed was too soft, too sensitive for his world, was now the only person between them and death. And she hadn't even blinked when she saw him. He thought of all the times she had asked him to slow down, to listen, to let her in. He had brushed her off every time, told her she was naive, too idealistic. He had said the world didn't reward softness. But maybe it did. Maybe it rewarded strength that didn't need to scream. He remembered something else now. One night long ago, when they had been lying on the rooftop of her apartment watching stars. She had turned to him and said, "I wanted to be a pilot before I ever touched a piano. My mother said no. Too dangerous. Too masculine. So I chose music. But I never stopped dreaming of flying." He had laughed then, teasing her gently. "You a pilot? You'd cry if the clouds looked too mean." She hadn't laughed. He had forgotten that moment, tucked it into the drawer of things he didn't want to face. Now here she was in full command at 30,000 feet, flying without engines, guiding an entire plane to safety with hundreds of lives on board. And Lucas, the man who thought he held the world in his hands, couldn't even steady his own breath. He didn't know what had happened to her in the years since. What training, what pain, what transformation had shaped her into the woman now behind that door. But he knew this, he had never really seen her. Not like this. Not until now. Inside the cockpit, Elena Carter moved with calm, practiced precision. The captain, conscious but dazed, blinked through foggy eyes as she ran a diagnostic scan on the remaining systems. Oxygen deprivation had set in quickly when the secondary power unit failed, and the first officer had slumped over without warning. The backup battery was failing autopilot, fighting against manual input. And both engines were completely offline. But Elena didn't panic. Her fingers flew across the panels, resetting circuits, overriding faulty feedback loops, and switching to manual configuration. Her training years in the Navy Reserves, countless hours in simulators, and a private pilot license renewed annually had prepared her for chaos, for worst-case scenarios, for today. Behind her, the flight attendant hovered. Do you need anything?" Water, Elena said without looking up. And quiet. The attendant left. The cockpit dimmed again. Only the soft glow of emergency lights and blinking warnings remained. The aircraft groaned as it descended in silence. Elena adjusted the trim, manually stabilizing pitch and angle of descent. Without engines, every second counted. Every movement had to be precise. Every decision irreversible. She reached for the comms. Mayday, Mayday. United 719. Dual engine failure. Requesting emergency guidance. This is Elena Carter assuming command. There was static. Then a voice. United 719, confirm your position. Do you have any power or engine thrust? No thrust. Gliding. Partial avionics. Request vector to nearest viable runway for dead stick landing. The line went quiet for a moment, then came back with clearance. Greensboro Regional, short runway. But it would have to do. A sharp knock came from the cockpit door. Occupied, she said sharply. It's me, a voice replied. Male, familiar, measured, Lucas. Her spine stiffened. Of course. He would find a way to speak with her, even here, even now. She opened the door a crack. He stood there still in his tailored suit, slightly rumpled, but his eyes no longer held the cold detachment she remembered. You shouldn't be here, she said flatly. I needed to know if you're okay. Her eyes narrowed. I'm flying a powerless plane from 30,000 feet. What do you think? He hesitated, then stepped forward an inch. I didn't know. She didn't respond. I didn't know you became a pilot, he added. You never asked, she said. You never wanted to know who I was when it didn't fit your world. Elena, I have no time for this, she snapped. Either sit down and buckle in, or help me run checklist protocols. I'm not here for a reunion. Lucas didn't argue. He looked down at the panel, blinking at the array of buttons and switches. Checklist, he asked quietly. She slid him the emergency procedure log. Read them. Out loud. Line by line. I'll confirm. He did. Slowly at first, then steadier. Her responses were clipped and clear. He watched her work, how her hands didn't tremble, how her eyes scanned the instruments with intense focus. She was utterly in control. This wasn't the Elena who used to whisper apologies when he raised his voice. This wasn't the Elena who waited by the piano for him to come home. This was a woman rebuilt, hardened, sharpened, but still, hers was the same voice, same poise, same quiet fire. I was wrong, he said suddenly between lines. She didn't look up. About what? About you. Silence. Elena, you're the bravest person I've ever known. Now she looked at him, briefly, and for the first time something shifted behind her eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet. but maybe something close to recognition. Then she turned back to the yoke. "We're descending. I need to calculate our final glide path. Sit down." He didn't argue. He backed away, shut the door behind him, and returned to his seat. The captain, more alert now, stirred beside her. "Elena?" he whispered. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "Dead stick to Greensboro. It's tight. But I've done worse in training." He smiled faintly. "You were always the one we watched in simulation?" She focused ahead. The runway wasn't in sight yet, but she knew it was coming. Somewhere beneath the clouds was solid ground. She would find it. And for the first time in 6 years, Elena Carter felt the weight of her own worth no longer defined by someone else's schedule, someone else's silence, or someone else's idea of love. She had the controls now, and this time she wasn't giving them up. Lucas sat in his seatbelt, fastened tight, hands clenched on his lap. The cabin around him remained unnervingly quiet. It wasn't calm. It was a silence born of fear, of people trying to believe they weren't about to die in the sky. The oxygen masks dangled unused now as the air pressure stabilized. But the fear lingered in every face, every stiff posture, every tremor. His mind, however, was nowhere near the cabin. It was in the cockpit, with her, with Elena. She was flying a plane with no engines, no thrust, and no margin for error, and she was doing it with the same quiet grace that used to fill the corners of his loft with music. That same grace he had once dismissed as fragility. Now it looked like the strongest force in the world. Lucas exhaled slowly and closed his eyes. Memories crept in, some unwelcome, some painfully vivid. He remembered the first time he met her, a charity gala. She wasn't supposed to be there. A friend of the pianist. She had stood near the bar in a faded blue dress that didn't quite fit the upscale crowd, sipping tonic water and scribbling notes in a music journal. She didn't recognize him. Didn't care about the press around his latest acquisition. And when he introduced himself, she only smiled faintly and said, "You look exhausted." He'd fallen for her honesty before he understood what it cost him. They were opposites. She valued quiet time and tension. He thrived on speed, ambition, and winning. At first, their differences fascinated him. Then they annoyed him. Then they became irreconcilable, or so he told himself. The real truth, he was afraid. Afraid that if he let her stay, she would see the cracks beneath his empire. The sleepless nights, the childhood poverty he never spoke of, the need for control that masked a deeper fear of failure. And so he let her go, because it was easier to pretend she was holding him back than admit she made him want more than power. A bump shook the cabin. Passengers jolted, some gasped. Lucas glanced at the wings, still steady. No flames, no panic from the crew, just the eerie sensation of falling without falling. Elena had leveled their descent. She had turned a doomed dive into a controlled glide. Another memory surfaced uninvited. Their last night together. She had cooked dinner. Not fancy, just pasta and a bottle of wine. She'd been quiet all evening, distant. He barely noticed. He was buried in a term sheet, eyes on numbers, not her. When she finally spoke, it was so soft he almost missed it. "Lucas, do you even want this life with me?" He had laughed without looking up. "Of course. Why would you ask that?" She didn't answer. Just walked to the window and stood in silence for a long time. He had gone to bed that night thinking they were fine. By morning she was gone. Now she was the only person between him and death. And somehow she was more composed than anyone else on the plane, including him. The intercom crackled again. "Elena here. We are 20 miles from Greensboro Regional, preparing descent vector. No need for evacuation protocols unless advised." I repeat, remain seated and stay calm. Her voice hadn't changed. Still low, still steady. But Lucas heard the strain beneath it. The responsibility, the weight. She was doing this not just for herself, for everyone. A man across the aisle leaned toward Lucas. "You know her?" Lucas nodded slowly. "I did. A long time ago." The man looked forward again. She's something. Yes. She always was. He just hadn't seen it clearly, until it was too late. Or maybe he thought not too late. Not entirely. He thought about what he would say if they made it to the ground, if she gave him even 5 minutes of her time, if she looked at him the way she used to. Would he apologize, admit the truth, ask for another chance? No. That wasn't fair to her. She didn't need to be someone's second realization. She needed to be seen as she was. And right now she was the one keeping them alive. Lucas looked out the window. The clouds were thinning. Land was beginning to form below. Lights, roads, the outline of something solid. They were getting closer. He could feel the change, and inside him something else shifted. Not just fear, not just regret, but the beginning of hope. Greensboro Regional Airport wasn't equipped for this kind of emergency. The tower controller, a young man named Devin Hayes, stared at his radar in disbelief. United 719 was descending fast, too fast, and the transponder signal showed 0 engine thrust, 0 vertical power, no backup thrust, no margin for error. He grabbed the comm and repeated United 799, "This is Greensboro Tower. Confirm your current pilot in command and status." There was a pause. Then a calm female voice cut through the static like a knife. "This is Elena Carter, assuming command. Former Navy Reserve. Current civilian pilot certification. Dual engine failure. Dead stick landing requested. Guidance to final vector." Hayes's eyebrows shot up. "Copy that, 799. You're cleared for emergency priority approach. Fire and rescue teams are standing by. Runway 32L is yours. Wind negligible. Visibility clear." Beside him, his supervisor leaned forward. Did she say Elena Carter? Before Hayes could answer, another voice joined the frequency. Older, commanding. "This is Colonel Ron Abrams, U.S. Air Operations. Confirming Pilot Carter's credentials. She's authorized and qualified. Do not question her clearance." The room went silent. No one argued. Back in the cockpit, Elena had already begun the final descent checklist. The captain, now alert and coherent, sat beside her monitoring backup systems and verifying calculations. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "We'll have one shot, no engines, no go-around. We glide in or we don't come out." He nodded. "Your descent profile is perfect," he said. "I've seen seasoned commercial pilots panic in less than this." She didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the small dots of runway lights appearing through the thinning clouds. Behind the cockpit door, the passengers held their breath. Lucas stared straight ahead, eyes unblinking, palms damp against the armrests. He had stopped checking his watch. Time meant nothing now, only altitude, only the slow crawl of lights rising up to meet them. He leaned toward the window. The runway was visible now, long and narrow, lined with emergency vehicles and flashing red lights. They were really doing this. The impossible. He had spent a lifetime believing that money could solve anything. That failure was only a stepping stone to a new acquisition. That loss could be minimized, even forgotten. But none of that mattered now. The woman he had abandoned was saving his life. Not for him, but because it was what she did. Because she had always been stronger than he could accept. And now the entire cabin knew it too. Flight attendants moved quietly, checking belts, whispering calm assurances. The panic had passed. In its place, an almost reverent stillness. Back up front, Elena adjusted the flaps, deploying final drag, holding speed at 135 knots. Winds are low, no shear. Glide path is clean. The captain looked at her, his respect evident. "You're a hell of a pilot." "No," she said. "I'm just the only one left." He smiled faintly. "Still counts." The altimeter ticked down. 3,000 feet, 2,000, 1,200. The plane was nearly silent except for the rush of air. No engine roar, no hydraulic whine. just a metal giant drifting through the sky on hope and math. Lucas could see the fire trucks lining the runway, the terminal beyond them, the sharp angle of final approach. Then the gear dropped. A thunk echoed beneath them. The cabin braced. Elena took one last breath and muttered softly, "Come on." She eased the yoke, adjusted trim manually, and held the line. The wheels touched down, hard but clean. The rubber screamed. Sparks flew. But the aircraft stayed straight. No engines meant no reverse thrust. She worked the brakes manually, using every ounce of muscle and finesse to slow the aircraft. 700 feet. They were still rolling fast. The plane finally began to decelerate, each groan of the brakes, a battle against momentum. When they came to a full stop, 2/3 down the runway, the entire cabin exhaled as one. Silence reigned. Then applause. Scattered at first, then louder. A wave of disbelief and gratitude. Cheers. Cries. People hugging strangers. Oxygen masks dangling like forgotten decorations. Lucas didn't clap. He just sat there, stunned, his eyes fixed on the cockpit door. She did it. She saved them. Without engines, without backup, without him. He swallowed the knot in his throat. He didn't know what he could say that would ever be enough, but he knew what he had to try. The cabin doors opened to the cold night air and rescue personnel rushed inside. Medics scanned the passengers for injuries, helping the elderly and shaken toward the exits. Yet everyone without exception paused as they stepped onto the tarmac, looking back toward the cockpit, waiting for her. But Elena didn't exit with the crew. She remained inside, completing post-landing diagnostics, answering protocol questions from ground control and debriefing with the flight captain. She moved through it all like she'd done it 100 times. Lucas stayed seated, watching from the first row, unmoving as the crowd thinned. Eventually, Elena emerged, headset slung around her neck, hair slightly tousled from the hours of stress, but face composed as ever. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't seek applause. She simply walked down the steps into the cool dark and the blinding lights of emergency responders. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. She didn't answer a single one. Lucas followed her at a distance, weaving through crew members and passengers until he caught up with her. Near a service van on the edge of the tarmac, she was alone, sipping water, her eyes distant. "Elena?" he said quietly. She turned. "Lucas." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you had this in you." Her jaw tightened. "No, you never wanted to know." He winced, but didn't deny it. "I thought you were a pianist," he said almost helplessly. "I was," she replied. "I am. But flying, this was always part of me too. Before music. Before you." He looked down. "I remember that night on your rooftop. You told me about flying, and you laughed. I didn't mean to. You didn't care enough not to," she said. "You cared about your next pitch, your next billion. You didn't ask about my world because you didn't think I had one." Her words stung because they were true, and he had no defense. "I didn't come here to argue," he said. "I just needed to say something." She waited, arms folded. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About what mattered. I've spent years convincing myself I let you go for a good reason. That success required sacrifice. That love would only distract me. And now," she asked, "now I see that success without you felt like failure," he admitted. "I had everything, but none of it meant anything." He stepped closer. "But seeing you today, what you did, I finally understood who you really are. You were never fragile. You were always stronger than me. I just didn't know how to live with someone I couldn't control." She looked at him, eyes softening just slightly. "And you think a speech changes that," he said. "But I needed to say it anyway. For once, not to fix something, just to own it." They stood in silence. Then she looked away. You know why I never told anyone about the flight training? He shook his head. Because it was mine, she said. It wasn't for validation. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't even to prove something. It was the one part of me I didn't let anyone shape. He understood now why she had walked away from him, why she never called after, why she didn't flinch when she saw him on the plane. She had already made peace with his absence. You were amazing up there, he said softly. I wasn't trying to be, she replied. I just did what needed to be done. Another silence. Then he asked, would you ever talk again someday? She tilted her head. I don't know. He nodded. That's fair. She started to walk away, then paused. You always said timing was everything. I did. Well, for once you're not late. But I don't know if you're on time either. She walked toward a group of airport officials, her silhouette sharp against the flashing lights. Lucas watched her go heart-heavy, but strangely still. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing a deal or an outcome. He was simply watching the woman he once loved become someone even greater than he remembered. And if that was all he was allowed to witness her in her power, it was more than he deserved. The hours that followed blurred into motion. Emergency crews cleared the runway, passengers were bussed to the terminal, and the FAA initiated its formal investigation. Elena gave a full report, her voice unwavering as she recounted every decision, every calculation, every manual adjustment. No one questioned her judgment. No one doubted her authority. Lucas remained in the terminal, sitting apart from the others. He had refused a ride, declined a hotel voucher. He wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He watched Elena from across the glass. She stood on the tarmac near the grounded plane, speaking to uniformed officials, clipboard in hand, still in her regulation hoodie and utility pants, still entirely in command. This wasn't just someone who reacted to a crisis. This was someone who had been preparing her whole life to rise when the moment came. And rise she had. Eventually, Elena stepped into the terminal, nodding politely at the staff who opened the door for her. She didn't look around for anyone. She moved with the quiet intent of someone used to solitude. Lucas stood slowly. You should get some rest, he said as she passed. She glanced at him but didn't stop. I've done harder things than stay awake. He followed. Not too close. Just enough to be heard. Elena, I never imagined you'd still be flying. She paused and turned to face him fully. You never imagined much about me, Lucas. You imagined what you needed me to be. That's not the same thing. I see that now, he said. Good, she replied. Then maybe you can carry that lesson forward. She was about to leave again when he added, I watched you land that plane. I watched the way you moved. Everyone in that cabin saw it. You turned fear into discipline, panic into purpose. She tilted her head, eyes unreadable. And I realized something. You didn't just save us. You taught us what calm looks like under fire. What it means to show up when nobody else can. Her posture softened slightly. That wasn't my goal. I know, he said, but it happened anyway. She shifted her weight. Her expression changed. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but something opened between them. A fragile window. Elena, he continued, when you walked away 6 years ago, I thought I would feel relief. I didn't. I felt hollow. And for a long time I blamed you for that. But it was me. I emptied out everything that made life real, including you. She didn't respond, just stood there still and listening. I built towers and filled them with people who told me what I wanted to hear. And you were the only person who ever told me the truth. I told you the truth because I loved you, she said, her voice low. And you left anyway. I know, he said. And I won't ask you to change that. I won't ask for anything except the chance to say thank you. She blinked, surprised. For what she asked? For saving all of us. And for reminding me who you are. Who you've always been. A long pause followed. She looked down, then up again. I'm not the same person, Lucas. I wouldn't want you to be. She exhaled deeply. I didn't land that plane thinking about you. I know, I landed it because I trained for it. Because I knew I could. Because people needed me. He nodded. And I've never admired you more. That surprised her. Not the words, but the tone. There was no entitlement in it, no plea for redemption, just a quiet statement of truth. She studied his face for a long moment. I'm staying here tonight, she finally said. Debrief tomorrow morning. Then I fly commercial back to Boston. He nodded. I'll stay too. Not to follow you. Just to be near. In case. In case what? In case someday you might want to talk again. She considered him, then gave the faintest nod. We'll see. Then she turned and walked away, heading for the staff hallway. Lucas remained still, his heart pounding, not with fear now, but with something quieter. Humbled hope. The flight was over, but something else had just begun. The next morning broke crisp and clear over Greensboro. Dew clung to the tarmac like a second skin, and the grounded Boeing 737 still sat under guard awaiting inspection. The news cycle had moved fast. Videos of the emergency landing were already viral, aviation experts offering commentary and headlines hailing the mysterious civilian pilot who saved 137 lives. But Elena Carter wasn't watching any of it. She sat at a small table in the back corner of a quiet airport cafe, sipping black coffee and reviewing the FAA paperwork that had been placed in her hotel room overnight. Her posture was as composed as ever, but there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there the day before. She had done everything right. The calculations, the descent, the manual flaps, the final touchdown, it had all worked. And yet the adrenaline had finally drained, leaving behind the weight of what could have gone wrong. She had stared down death at 30,000 feet, and now she had to return to a life that wouldn't understand what that meant. Across the terminal, Lucas spotted her through the cafe window. He paused, unsure whether to interrupt. She looked so still, so self-contained. Part of him feared that if he spoke, she would disappear again, like a dream receding at dawn. But she saw him, and this time she didn't look away. He entered slowly. She didn't stand, just gestured toward the empty chair across from her. I figured I'd find you here, he said as he sat. I wasn't hiding, she replied. I know. He glanced at the coffee in front of her, then at the neat stack of papers beside it. Is that all from the FAA? Yes. Routine. Technical debrief, flight data review. They'll ask 100 questions I've already answered. You going back to Boston today? Yes. Afternoon flight? Commercial? She smiled faintly. With engines this time. He chuckled softly, but the silence that followed stretched long. Then Lucas leaned forward. There's something I haven't told you. Elena raised an eyebrow. Yesterday during the descent, I was afraid. Not of dying. Not exactly. But of never getting to say this. I used to think I left you behind because I needed to focus, because timing wasn't right. But that wasn't the truth. She didn't interrupt. I left you, he said quietly, because I didn't believe I deserved you. Now she looked at him, eyes narrowing with curiosity. I thought love made me weak, he continued. I thought needing someone meant losing control. But the truth is, you were the only person who ever made me want to be more than I was. That's not weakness, she said softly. No, I see that now. They sat in silence again. A different kind now. One that wasn't empty, but full. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said, and I'm not asking you to come back. But I do want you to know, if you ever looked in my direction again, if you ever opened that door, I wouldn't run this time. Elena stirred her coffee slowly, eyes on the swirling liquid. Then she said, You know the scariest part of yesterday? He shook his head. It wasn't the power loss, or the dead stick. It was walking into that cockpit knowing I was the last line of defense, that if I failed, everyone died. He held his breath. And yet she continued somewhere deep inside. I wasn't afraid. Not because I knew I'd succeed, but because I knew I was finally the version of myself I'd always wanted to be. She looked up, and that version no longer needs to be understood by anyone but me. Lucas nodded slowly, accepting it. But she added, that doesn't mean I don't appreciate what you just said. A flicker of something passed between them, soft, cautious, real. She checked the clock on her phone. I have an hour before boarding. He stood. Can I wait with you? She paused, then nodded. Yes, she said. You can. And just like that, the quiet between them became something else. Not distance, but possibility. Gate 17. A17 was nearly empty when they arrived. The early afternoon lull had quieted the terminal, leaving only the hum of distant announcements and the occasional roll of luggage wheels on tile. Elena stood at the window, arms folded, watching the tarmac like she had the night before, but this time from the outside looking in. Lucas sat 2 rows behind her, giving her space. She hadn't asked him to sit farther away, but he knew better than to crowd her now. He was here only because she allowed it. She turned to him after a while. You don't have a flight? No, he said, rising. I just wanted to see yours take off. She raised an eyebrow. Not very efficient. Some things are worth the time. A flicker of something passed behind her expression. Surprise, maybe? Or quiet acknowledgement. Then she sat down beside him. No more distance. They sat like that for several minutes, not touching, not speaking, but not separate either. Eventually she broke the silence. After I left you, she said, I didn't stop thinking about what I could have done differently. Lucas turned slightly toward her. But now I realize, she continued, there was nothing I could have done. You didn't want to see who I really was. And I was tired of performing a version of myself to fit into your world. He nodded. That's true. She looked down at her hands. I didn't need you to fix me. I needed you to stand beside me. Quietly. Without needing to be in control. I couldn't back then, he admitted. I didn't know how. But you do now, he met her gaze. I think I'm starting to. The boarding announcement for her flight echoed through the terminal. She reached for her small bag. No suitcase, just a worn leather backpack with a stitched patch from her pilot training years. He noticed it for the first time. You always carried that, he asked. Everywhere. You never wanted to leave that part of yourself behind, did you, though, she said. Because it was mine before anything else was. They stood together at the gate. The other passengers had begun to line up, scanning phones, adjusting carry-ons, but neither of them moved yet. I meant what I said yesterday, Lucas told her. I'm not asking for anything, but I would wait if you ever wanted to talk again. She studied him carefully. Then instead of answering, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. This is the hangar where I log my private flight hours on weekends, she said, handing it to him. If you ever want to learn how to fly. Lucas blinked, surprised. You'd teach me. I'd let you sit in the second seat, she replied with a faint smile. The first one's taken. He laughed under his breath. Fair enough. The final boarding call rang out. Elena stepped forward, scanned her pass, and turned toward the jetway. She paused just before disappearing through the door. Lucas, she said. He looked up. I'm not the same girl you left. I know, he said. And that's a good thing. It really is. She held his eyes for a moment longer. Then she nodded once and walked through the gate. He stood there a long time, watching the empty doorway, even after the gate closed and the flight crew left. When the plane finally pushed back from the terminal, he walked back to the window and watched it taxi toward the runway. As it lifted into the sky, climbing higher with each second, Lucas didn't feel regret. He felt something quieter. Hope. Maybe their story had ended in that penthouse years ago. Or maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting to begin again. But this time she was flying the plane. and he was finally ready to be on board, not to lead, not to control, but simply to go wherever she was willing to let him. Because some landings aren't the end. They're the moment you finally learn how to take off.